I laid in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling as Marcia's venomous words echoed through my mind. Abby, you're a useless draining weight on this family. Max deserves better than a wife who wallows in bed all day. Her cruel remark cut deep, reopening wounds that never seemed to heal. I closed my eyes, trying to escape the harsh reality that had become my life, but the memories came flooding back, unbidden. It all started with that fateful day, the day my life changed forever. I had been working late at the art studio, lost in the creative flow that had once brought me such joy. As I left the building, the wheelchair ramp malfunctioned, sending me tumbling violently to the ground. The searing pain that followed would forever be seared into my memory. The doctors delivered the devastating news. I was paralyzed from the waist down, my dreams of being a successful artist crushed in an instant. Max had been supportive at first, but over time, the strain of caring for me took its toll on our marriage. His family never made any effort to hide their disdain towards me. Marcia, with her perpetual scowl and cutting remarks, made it clear that she saw me as nothing more than a burden. Hank, her husband, simply followed her lead, his silence just as damaging as her words. Even Jenna, Max's sister, couldn't resist taking jabs at me whenever the opportunity arose. Why bother getting up? Not like you can do anything useful from bed anyway, she would taunt, flipping through my sketches with a dismissive sneer. I tried to channel my pain into my artwork, pouring my emotions onto the canvas, but it was never enough. The constant barrage of negativity and resentment wore me down, day by day. Then the final blow came from the one person I thought would always stand by me. Max sat on the edge of our bed, his expression somber as he delivered the words that shattered my heart into a million pieces. I need someone who can support me, Abby. This isn't the life I wanted, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. In that moment, I knew that I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than a burden. It was time to take control of my life, to find the strength within myself that had been buried beneath years of emotional turmoil. As I packed my belongings, Carla, my kind and supportive housekeeper, offered a gentle smile. You're doing the right thing, Abby. It's time to start living for yourself. With a newfound determination, I left the house that had become a prison, embarking on a journey that would lead me to a life I never could have imagined. The devastating accident that left me paralyzed from the waist down replayed in my mind like a broken record. It was a sunny morning, and I was running late for work at the art studio. In my haste, I didn't notice the loose bolt on the wheelchair ramp until it was too late. As I descended, the ramp suddenly gave way, sending me tumbling violently to the ground. The searing pain that shot through my back was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I lay there, helpless and alone, praying for someone to find me. Hours seemed to pass before a coworker finally discovered me and called for an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a blur, but the doctor's words were crystal clear. I'm sorry, Miss Miller, but the impact has caused severe damage to your spinal cord. You'll never walk again. Those words shattered my world. My dreams, my independence, my future, all gone in an instant. Max was by my side, his face etched with concern, but even then, I could sense the strain it was putting on our relationship. In the months that followed, I tried my best to adjust to my new reality. Max hired Carla, a kind and firm housekeeper, to help me with daily tasks. She was a godsend, always offering a gentle touch and a listening ear. You're stronger than you think, Abby, she would say, her warm smile a beacon of hope in my darkest moments. But as time passed, the cracks in our once happy marriage began to show. Max's family, who had never been particularly fond of me, grew increasingly resentful. Marcia, my mother-in-law, made no effort to hide her disdain. Look at her, just lying there like a useless lump, she would snarl, her words cutting deeper than any knife. Hank, her husband, would simply nod in agreement, his silence just as damaging as her venom. Even Jenna, Max's sister, couldn't resist taking jabs at me. Why bother trying to draw? It's not like anyone would want to buy art from a cripple, she would sneer, tossing my sketchbook aside with a cruel laugh. Through it all, Carla remained my rock, my unwavering source of strength. Don't let them break you, Abby, she would whisper, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. But as the resentment and bitterness grew, I found it harder and harder to hold on to hope. Max grew distant, consumed by his work and the pressure from his family. Our once loving relationship had become a mere shell, a constant reminder of all that I had lost. It was during one of our rare conversations that Max finally revealed the truth. "I can't do this anymore, Abby. I need a wife who can support me, not someone I have to take care of." His words hit me like a ton of bricks, but deep down, I knew he was right. Our marriage had become a prison, a constant struggle against the weight of his family's cruelty and my own limitations. As I watched him walk out the door, a newfound determination took root within me. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control how I responded. It was time to take back my life, to rise from the ashes of my shattered dreams and show the world, and Max's family, that I was more than just a burden. With Carla by my side, I began to plan my escape, my path to freedom and redemption. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that would soon burn brighter than any flame. After Max's departure, the hostility from his family escalated to new heights. Marcia, my bitter mother-in-law, seemed to take perverse pleasure in tormenting me at every opportunity. "What's the point in Max having a wife who can't even cook dinner?" she would snarl, her eyes filled with contempt as she glared at me from across the room. Hank, her husband, would simply sit in silence, his lack of defense cutting just as deep as Marcia's cruel words. Even Jenna, Max's sister, who had recently moved back in after her own marriage fell apart, couldn't resist piling on the abuse. "You're just a burden, Abby," she would sneer, tossing my sketchbook aside with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Why bother trying to draw when you'll never amount to anything?" Through it all, Carla remained my rock, her unwavering support and encouragement the only thing keeping me from slipping into despair. "Don't let them break you, Abby," she would whisper, her warm embrace a lifeline in the midst of the storm. "You're stronger than they'll ever be." And so I clung to my art, pouring my pain and frustration onto the canvas, creating vibrant worlds that offered a temporary escape from the harsh reality that surrounded me. But no matter how hard I tried, the constant barrage of negativity and resentment took its toll. I found it harder and harder to summon the creative spark that had once burned so brightly within me. One day, as I struggled to capture the image in my mind, Jenna sauntered into the room, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "What's the point of all this?" she sneered, gesturing dismissively at my work. "No one's ever going to buy art from a cripple." Her words cut like a knife, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. I hurled my paintbrush across the room, the splatters of color a vivid representation of the rage that coursed through my veins. "Get out," I growled, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Get out and don't come back until you've learned some basic human decency." Jenna's eyes widened in shock, but before she could respond, Carla appeared in the doorway, her expression one of steely determination. "You heard her," Carla said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It's time for you to leave." Jenna opened her mouth to protest, but one look from Carla was enough to silence her. With a huff of indignation, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Carla turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and pride. "You did the right thing, Abby. You don't deserve to be treated like that." I nodded, my hands still shaking from the confrontation. "I can't live like this anymore, Carla. I need to get out of here, away from all of this toxicity." Carla's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze my hand reassuringly. "Then we'll find a way," she said, her voice filled with determination. "You deserve to be happy, Abby, and I'll do whatever it takes to help you achieve that." As she spoke those words, I felt a glimmer of hope ignite within me, a hope that, for the first time in years, burned brighter than the darkness that had consumed me. It was time to take control of my life, to break free from the shackles of Max's family and their cruelty. And with Carla by my side, I knew that nothing was impossible. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, Jenna's return to the family home added fuel to the already raging fire of hostility. Fresh from her own failed marriage, she seemed determined to take out her bitterness and frustration on me. Well, if it isn't the useless cripple," she would sneer, her words dripping with venom as she sauntered into the room. "Still moping around, I see." I tried to ignore her taunts, focusing instead on my artwork, the one thing that still brought me solace in the midst of the storm. But Jenna was relentless, her cruelty knowing no bounds. "What's the point of all this?" she would mock, flipping through my sketchbook with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "No one's ever going to buy art from a pathetic waste of space like you." Carla, bless her soul, was always there to intervene, her fierce loyalty and unwavering support a constant source of strength. "That's enough, Jenna," she would say, her voice firm but laced with compassion. "Abby doesn't deserve to be treated like that." But Jenna was like a rabid dog, snapping and snarling at anyone who dared to challenge her. "Stay out of this, Carla," she would snarl. "This is family business." And then her gaze would turn back to me, her eyes filled with a twisted mixture of pity and disdain. "Why bother getting up, Abby? Not like you can do anything useful from bed anyway." Those words cut deeper than any knife, reigniting the pain and despair that had become my constant companions. In those moments, it was all I could do to hold back the tears, to maintain the fragile facade of strength that had become my only defense. But Carla saw through it all, her keen eyes picking up on the subtle cracks in my armor. "Don't listen to her, Abby," she would whisper, her warm embrace a lifeline in the midst of the storm. "You're stronger than they'll ever be." And so I clung to those words, using them as a shield against the constant barrage of cruelty and disdain. I poured my pain and frustration onto the canvas, creating vibrant worlds that offered a temporary escape from the harsh reality that surrounded me. But no matter how hard I tried, the weight of their words was suffocating, threatening to snuff out the last flickering embers of hope that burned within me. One day, as I sat in my room, trying to capture the image in my mind, Jenna barged in, her eyes narrowed with disdain. "Still at it, I see," she sneered, her gaze sweeping over my work with a contemptuous sneer. "You really are pathetic, you know that?" Something inside me snapped, and before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "At least I'm not a bitter, miserable failure like you," I spat, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. Jenna's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. But then a cruel smile twisted her lips, and she let out a harsh laugh. "You're right, Abby," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "At least I'm not a useless cripple who's nothing but a burden on everyone around her." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving me to drown in the aftermath of her cruel words. As the tears streamed down my cheeks, Carla appeared in the doorway, her expression one of concern and sympathy. "Don't listen to her, Abby," she said, her voice gentle but laced with steel. "You're worth 1,000 of her." I nodded, too choked up to speak, and allowed Carla to pull me into a comforting embrace. In that moment, I knew that something had to change, that I couldn't go on living like this, surrounded by such cruelty and toxicity. It was time to take control of my life, to break free from the shackles of Max's family and their constant torment. And with Carla by my side, I knew that I had the strength to do it. The tension in the household was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcia's disdain for me had only grown more palpable with Jenna's return, and even Hank, normally so passive, seemed to be emboldened by his daughter's cruelty. It all came to a head one evening when Max came to visit. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that seeing me might rekindle some of the love and compassion that had once been the foundation of our marriage. But as soon as he stepped through the door, I could see the change in his eyes. Gone was the warmth and affection I had grown so accustomed to, replaced by a cold, detached stare that chilled me to the bone. "Abby," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, "we need to talk." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest, as I followed him into the living room, where Marcia, Hank, and Jenna were already waiting, their expressions ranging from smug satisfaction to outright glee. Max took a deep breath, and then the words I had been dreading tumbled out. "I'm leaving you, Abby. I can't do this anymore." The room seemed to spin around me, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. But Max pressed on, his voice growing colder with each word. "I need someone who can support me, not someone I have to take care of. This isn't the life I wanted." Marcia let out a triumphant cackle, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Finally, he's come to his senses," she crowed. "You were never good enough for him, Abby, just a useless burden." Jenna nodded in agreement, her lips twisted into a cruel smirk. "Good riddance," she spat. Maybe now Max can find a real woman, not some pathetic cripple. I opened my mouth to protest, to beg Max to reconsider, but the words died in my throat. What was the point? It was clear that his mind was made up, that he had been poisoned by the toxic influence of his family. Carla, bless her soul, tried to intervene, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "How dare you speak to her like that?" she snarled, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Abby is 10 times the person any of you will ever be." But her words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the chorus of cruel laughter that echoed through the room. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain, the anguish, the endless torment, it all crystallized into a burning resolve, a determination to break free from this toxic cycle of abuse once and for all. I looked at Max, my heart hardening with each passing second. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If that's how you really feel, then I'm leaving." Marcia's laughter died in her throat, her eyes widening in surprise. "What did you say?" she spluttered, her face flushing an ugly shade of red. But I was done cowering, done being the victim. "You heard me," I said, my voice ringing with newfound strength. "I'm leaving this poisonous environment, and I'm never coming back." Jenna opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a sharp glare. "Save it," I snapped. "I'm done listening to your pathetic attempts at tearing me down. I'm stronger than all of you combined, and it's time I started living my life on my own terms." With that, I turned and wheeled myself out of the room, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Carla fell into step beside me, her eyes shining with pride and admiration. "I've never been more proud of you, Abby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're finally free." And as we left that toxic house behind, I knew that she was right. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. I was free, and nothing, not Max, not Marcia, not anyone, was ever going to hold me back again. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as Carla and I pulled up to the lakeside cabin I had inherited from my parents. It was a rustic yet cozy retreat nestled among towering pines and overlooking a pristine body of water that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. As I wheeled myself onto the porch, taking in the breathtaking scenery, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying until that moment. "Welcome home, Abby," Carla said, her voice warm and filled with pride. "This is where you're meant to be." And she was right. From the moment we stepped inside, I knew that this place, this haven, was exactly what I needed to start my new life, to finally break free from the shackles of Max's toxic family and their endless cruelty. The cabin was a blank canvas, just waiting for me to make it my own. And with Carla's help, that's exactly what we did. We transformed the spacious living area into a stunning studio, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light and offered breathtaking views of the lake. Carla helped me set up my easels and organize my supplies, her keen eye for detail ensuring that every aspect of the space was perfectly tailored to my needs. "This is your domain, Abby," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "A place where you can create without limits, without anyone holding you back." And create I did. With each stroke of my brush, I poured my heart and soul onto the canvas, channeling the pain and anguish of my past into vibrant, emotive pieces that seemed to come alive before my very eyes. Carla was my constant companion, offering encouragement and support every step of the way. "Your talent is inspiring, Abby," she would say, her eyes filled with admiration. "The world needs to see it." And so, with her help, I began to build my portfolio, showcasing my work online and in local galleries. At first, the response was modest, but as word of my talent spread, the commissions began to pour in. Before long, I was able to support myself entirely through my art, a feat I had once thought impossible. But more than just financial independence, my success brought with it a sense of empowerment and validation that I had been sorely lacking in my life. No longer was I the useless burden that Max's family had so cruelly labeled me. I was a thriving artist, a woman in control of her own destiny, and nothing, not their cruelty, not their disdain, could ever take that away from me. As the months passed, I found myself growing stronger, more confident, and more sure of myself than I had ever been before. The peaceful surroundings of the cabin, coupled with Carla's unwavering support, had become a sanctuary, a place where I could heal, both physically and emotionally. And yet, even as I basked in my newfound freedom and success, a part of me couldn't help but wonder about the family I had left behind. What had become of Max and his toxic brood? Had they continued to wallow in their own bitterness and resentment, or had my departure forced them to confront the ugliness of their actions? I tried not to dwell on those thoughts, focusing instead on the present and the bright future that stretched out before me. But deep down, I knew that one day I would have to face them again, if not for my own sake, then for the sake of the countless others who had suffered at their hands. And when that day came, I vowed to be ready, my newfound strength and resilience a shield against their cruelty and a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt the sting of their malice. For now, though, I was content to simply revel in my newfound independence, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the warmth of Carla's friendship. This was my life now, and no one, not Max, not Marcia, not anyone, was ever going to take that away from me again. Life at the lakeside cabin was everything I had dreamed of and more. The peace and tranquility of the surroundings provided the perfect backdrop for my art, and with each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident, and more in control of my own destiny. Carla was a constant source of support and encouragement, her unwavering belief in me fueling my determination to succeed. Together, we had created a haven, a place where I could thrive, free from the toxic influence of Max's family and their endless cruelty. But even as I basked in my newfound independence, the ghosts of my past refused to stay buried. It started with a phone call, the shrill ring shattering the peaceful silence of the cabin like a bolt of lightning. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart sink. It was Marcia, no doubt calling to unleash another torrent of abuse and vitriol. Without a second thought, I let it go to voicemail, refusing to let her poison seep back into my life. But the calls kept coming, day after day, week after week, each one more insistent than the last. And with each unanswered ring, I could feel the weight of my past growing heavier, threatening to drag me back into the darkness I had fought so hard to escape. Finally, one day, as the phone rang for what felt like the 100th time, something inside me snapped. With a trembling hand, I answered, bracing myself for the onslaught of hatred that was sure to follow. But the voice on the other end was not what I expected. "Abby?" Marcia's voice was strained, almost pleading. "Please, we need your help." I felt a surge of anger rise within me, but before I could respond, she continued. "Max, he's made a mess of everything. The business is failing. We're drowning in debt. And I'm sick, Abby, really sick." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought she had hung up. But then her voice came through again, barely above a whisper. "We were wrong, Abby. So wrong. Please, come back. We need you." The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone, my mind racing with 1,000 different emotions. Part of me wanted to laugh, to revel in the sweet taste of revenge, to let them suffer as they had made me suffer for so long. But another part of me, the part that had once loved Max, that had seen the good in his family despite their flaws, couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Carla must have sensed my turmoil, because she appeared at my side, her eyes filled with concern. "What is it, Abby?" she asked gently. I took a deep breath and told her everything, laying bare the raw emotions that Marcia's words had stirred within me. To her credit, Carla didn't judge or dismiss my feelings. Instead, she simply listened, offering a shoulder to lean on and a sympathetic ear. "You've come so far, Abby," she said when I had finished. "Don't let them drag you back into that darkness." Her words resonated deep within me, reminding me of the strength and resilience I had cultivated over these past few months. I was no longer the broken, defeated woman they had once known. I was a survivor, a fighter, and I wasn't about to let their toxic influence poison my newfound happiness. But even as I resolved to push them from my mind, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what had transpired to bring them to such a desperate state. Had Max's ambition finally caught up with him? Had Jenna's bitterness consumed her from within? And what of Marcia's cryptic confession? What illness could have possibly humbled her so? Against my better judgment, I found myself growing curious, a morbid fascination taking root in the depths of my mind. Perhaps it was time to face them one last time, to confront the demons of my past and lay them to rest once and for all. Perhaps in doing so, I could finally find the closure I had been seeking all along. With a newfound resolve, I turned to Carla, my eyes alight with determination. "Book me a flight," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "It's time I paid Max and his family a visit." The familiar streets of my hometown felt like a foreign land as Carla and I made our way to Max's family home. So much had changed since I had last been here. I had changed, grown stronger and more resilient in the face of their cruelty. As we pulled up to the house, a sense of trepidation washed over me. What would I find on the other side of that door? Had they truly hit rock bottom, or was this all just another twisted game, another attempt to tear me down? Carla must have sensed my hesitation because she reached over and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You've got this, Abby," she said, her voice filled with unwavering confidence. "Remember who you are and what you've overcome." With a deep breath, I steeled my resolve and wheeled myself up to the front door. Before I could even knock, it swung open, revealing a sight that nearly took my breath away. Marcia stood before me, her once immaculate appearance, now disheveled and unkempt. Her eyes were sunken, her skin sallow, and she seemed to have aged a decade in the short time since I had last seen her. "Abby," she croaked, her voice little more than a raspy whisper. "You came." I nodded, struggling to keep my composure in the face of her haggard appearance. "I came," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter, and as I wheeled myself into the familiar living room, I was struck by the state of disrepair that had befallen the once pristine home. Piles of unopened mail and overflowing ashtrays littered every surface, and the air was thick with the stale scent of despair. And then, there they were, Max, Jenna, and Hank, huddled together on the tattered sofa like a pack of wounded animals. They looked up as I entered, their eyes a mixture of shame and relief. "Abby," Max breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." I held up a hand, silencing him before he could continue. "Save it," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound strength and confidence. "I'm not here for your apologies or your excuses. I'm here to set the record straight, once and for all." Jenna opened her mouth to protest, but one look from Carla was enough to silence her. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that the tables had well and truly turned. "For years you treated me like a burden, like I was nothing more than a useless cripple," I continued, my gaze sweeping over each of them in turn. "You mocked me, belittled me, and tried to break me down at every turn." Marcia flinched, her eyes downcast, but I pressed on, the words tumbling from my lips like a dam bursting. "But you failed. You failed because you underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my determination to rise above your cruelty." I gestured to the disheveled state of the room, the tangible evidence of their downfall. "Look around you. This is what happens when you let bitterness and resentment consume you. This is the price you pay for treating others with such callous disregard." Max opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a sharp shake of my head. "No, Max, it's my turn to speak now." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the final blow. "While you were busy tearing me down, I was building something for myself. A life, a career, a future, all things you said I could never have." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick portfolio, filled with samples of my work and glowing reviews from critics and collectors alike. "This is what you mocked me for," I said, tossing the portfolio onto the coffee table with a resounding thud. "This is the useless art that you said no one would ever want." Jenna's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages, her mouth hanging open in a silent gasp of disbelief. "But you were wrong," I continued, my voice rising with each word. "You were all wrong about me, and now the world knows the truth, that I am a survivor, a fighter, and a force to be reckoned with." I wheeled myself closer until I was mere inches from where they sat, huddled together like frightened children. "You called me a burden, but look at you now, crumbling under your own weight. I'm stronger without you, stronger than I've ever been, and that's something you'll never be able to take away from me." With those final words, I turned and made my way towards the door, Carla beaming with pride at my side. As we stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the weight of their hatred, their cruelty, and their toxic influence. I was free, truly free, and nothing they could say or do would ever change that. In that moment, I knew that I had won, not just the battle but the war, and as we drove away, leaving their shattered lives behind, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge, it seemed, was indeed a dish best served cold. The sound of my purse unzipping made me jolt upright on the living room couch. My heart raced as I spotted Kyle, my new stepson, rifling through it greedily. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, anger surging through me. Kyle froze, clutching a wad of bills in his hand. "I was just borrowing some cash," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I marched over and snatched my purse back. "You can't just steal from me. That money was for groceries." He glared at me defiantly. "Since when do I need permission to take what's mine? My dad makes enough to cover the little you spend." The sheer audacity of his words left me stunned. How did this entitled brat think he could justify thievery under my own roof? Alan rushed in from the kitchen, alerted by the commotion. "What's going on?" "Your son here helped himself to cash from my purse. Again," I said through gritted teeth. Alan's expression hardened as he turned to Kyle. "Son, you know you can't just take things without asking, especially from Marlene." "Why not?" Kyle scoffed. "You're the one who married this broke widow and brought her into our family." The venom in his words struck like vicious blows. I recoiled, feeling like an unwanted outsider being ungratefully tolerated in their home. Alan stepped towards Kyle, his fists clenched. "That's enough. You'll treat Marlene with respect. She's your stepmother now, and this is her house too." "Oh yeah? Well, maybe if you hadn't wasted your money on this loser." In a flash, Alan grabbed Kyle by the collar and shoved him against the wall. I gasped, my heart pounding frantically. "Don't you ever speak about her like that again," Alan growled, his face contorted with rage I'd never seen before. "Get out of my sight before I really lose it." Kyle shrugged off Alan's grip, straightening his shirt as he headed for the door. "Whatever, old man. You're both pathetic." The front door slammed, leaving Alan and I alone in a tense silence. He buried his face in his hands, sighing heavily. I'm so sorry you had to see that, Marlene." His voice quivered with a mix of anger and dismay. "No, I'm the one who's sorry," I said, fighting back tears. "If I'd known your son was going to cause so much drama, I never would have." "Don't say that." Alan gently took my hands in his. "Kyle's issues aren't your fault. I'll deal with him." I stared back at my new husband, my heart aching with doubts and insecurities. This wasn't the fresh start I'd envisioned when I agreed to marry Alan and move into his home. Kyle's resentment towards me had manifested more venomously than I could have imagined. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a storm that would shake the very foundations of my life. A darkness loomed on the horizon, and the relative peace I'd found after my first husband's passing was about to be shattered. Later that night, Alan and I sat in tense silence at the dinner table, both of us too shaken to have much appetite. The earlier blow-up with Kyle had cast a dark cloud over our newly merged household. "I need to explain some things about Kyle," Alan finally said, pushing his half-eaten plate away. "Things I probably should have told you before we got married." I felt a knot forming in my stomach, bracing myself for whatever troubles lay beneath the surface of his son's repulsive behavior. Alan took a deep breath. "Kyle's mother and we had a really nasty divorce when he was 14. Lots of screaming matches and ugly custody battles. She managed to turn him against me for years with her vicious lies." He shook his head slowly. "Then she hooked up with this real scumbag boyfriend who introduced Kyle to drugs, petty crime, you name it. By the time I got him back, he was already deep into that world, stealing, selling drugs, running with a bad crew." My eyes widened in disbelief. My God, I had no idea it was that bad. He's been in real legal trouble? "More than once," Alan said grimly. "Theft, possession charges, you name it. He's pulled himself out of some deep holes but keeps finding his way back into them." I stared at him, aghast. "If he's really that messed up, how could you allow him to just move in here after we married? He's putting us both at risk." "Because he's my son." Alan snapped, defensiveness flaring in his eyes. "Despite all his screw-ups, I can't just abandon him. He's got nobody else in this world." I wanted to argue, to insist that Kyle's very presence was a clear threat to the peaceful life I craved, the life I thought I was signing up for by marrying Alan. But I could see the anguish and guilt weighing heavily on my new husband's shoulders. I'm sorry, I said, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. I know you're in an impossible situation as his dad. We'll get through this together, okay? Alan squeezed my hand tightly and managed a pained smile. You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that. Most other women would have run for the hills by now. I tried to make light of the situation. Well, I'm too stubborn and strong-willed to let a little thing like your criminal son scare me off. We both managed a gentle laugh, momentarily breaking the tension. But as Alan headed to take a shower, leaving me alone at the table, a cold realization crept over me. The casual theft from my purse had been just the tip of the iceberg. By welcoming Kyle into our home, we'd opened the door to a world of darkness, illegal activities, violence, and God knows what other dangers. I remembered the cocky smirk on his face as he insulted me mere hours ago. There was something chillingly sinister lurking behind those eyes, far beyond the brashness of typical teenage rebellion. A shudder ran down my spine. Had I grossly underestimated the depravity of this boy? No, this man whose twisted path in life could easily bring ruin to the new dream I was trying to build? I knew in that moment that dark days lay ahead. Kyle's very presence had instantly transformed my new marriage from a longed-for sanctuary into a minefield of constantly looking over my shoulder. And as I absorbed the full scope of the situation Alan had gradually let slip, one thing became crystallized in my mind. That vile, manipulative snake was not going to take away my hard-won chance at happiness without a brutal fight. In the weeks that followed, Kyle's audacious demands and destructive behavior only escalated. It was as if he viewed our home as his personal playground, thinking he could treat Alan and I as his servants. I need some extra cash, he declared one morning, barging into the kitchen while I prepared breakfast. My car payment's due. I shot him an incredulous look over my shoulder. Your car payment? Maybe you should get a job and cover your own expenses for once. Kyle sneered. Why should I work when my dad has so much money? Just give me what I need. That's enough, Alan interjected sternly, entering from the living room. I'm not just handing you piles of cash whenever you want it. You're a grown man. Act like it and get a job. In a blur of movement, Kyle swept his arm across the kitchen counter, sending plates, glasses, and silverware clattering to the floor in an explosion of shattered ceramic and glass. You ungrateful old bastard, he screamed, his face contorted into an animalistic rage. After all the hell I went through because of you. Alan stood motionless, seemingly petrified by his son's outburst. I jumped back, gasping as shards crunched under my feet. Get out, I growled through gritted teeth, mustering all my courage. Get out of our house right now, before I call the police. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. With one last menacing glare at us both, he spun on his heel and stormed down the hallway, slamming the front door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Once his footsteps faded, I crumpled into a chair, struggling to fight back terrified sobs. Alan immediately moved to comfort me, wrapping his arms tightly around my shaking shoulders. His own eyes were glazed with moisture. I'm so sorry, Marlene, he whispered hoarsely. You never should have had to go through that. You need to make him leave, I said, forcing the words out between shuddering breaths. He's out of control. He's going to seriously hurt one of us. Alan drew back, cupping my face in his calloused hands. I know, baby. After that explosion, I finally see he's too far gone. Thank God, I thought with a surge of relief. Finally, he was seeing sense. Or so I believed, until Kyle sauntered back through the front door 2 hours later, looking utterly unfazed by his meltdown. And he wasn't alone. Trailing closely behind him was a flashy woman in her late 20s with heavy eye makeup and tight, revealing clothes. Her disinterested scowl seemed permanently affixed on her face. Kyle flung his arm around her shoulders, grinning smugly at us. Since you two don't seem to like me being around so much, I'll just have Diane here move in to keep me company. The blood drained from my face as Alan and I exchanged a look of disbelieving horror. Move his skanky girlfriend. No, this couldn't be happening. Kyle? Absolutely not, Alan warned, anger seeping back into his voice. Don't you dare bring that kind of riffraff into our home. Too bad, old man. It's happening, Kyle taunted. With that, he brushed past us both, pulling Diane down the hallway to what was originally Alan's study. Oh yeah, You guys can move your little homework space to the garage, he called over his shoulder flippantly. Me and Babe need our own bedroom. I slumped back into the chair, burying my face in my hands as the sounds of raucous laughter and thumping bass erupted from down the hallway. This nightmare was only getting worse, and my husband seemed powerless to rein in his monster of a son. Living under the same roof as Kyle and his disrespectful girlfriend Diane was a waking nightmare. Nights were filled with thumping bass from their room, shouting matches, and God knows what other disturbances. Worst of all were the little glimpses I'd catch of disturbing activities whenever I passed by their door, furtive figures coming and going at all hours, hushed conversations abruptly silenced by glares in my direction. It was becoming increasingly clear that more than just his obnoxious presence was pervading our home. Kyle was running some sort of illicit operation right under our roof, putting Alan and I at legal risk. One sweltering summer night, the hallway reeked of marijuana smoke yet again. I stormed down to their door and pounded my fist against it furiously. Kyle, keep that crap away from our part of the house. I'm not letting you turn this into some kind of trap den. The door flew open, and Kyle's sneering face appeared in the cloud of smoke. Back off, you dried-up old hag, he spat. What I do in my room is none of your business. My jaw clenched with rage. It becomes my business when it's happening in my home and putting me in legal jeopardy. From over Kyle's shoulder, I spotted Diane lounging on the bed in a skimpy top, lazily scrolling on her phone as if nothing were amiss. You want a nice, quiet home? Maybe you should have stayed a lonely widow then, instead of marrying into my family's problems. Kyle snarled. With a sudden shove, he sent me stumbling back. I lost my balance and crumpled hard onto the hallway floor, crying out in shock and pain as my elbow smacked against the wall. That's it! You're out of here! I heard Alan roar as he rushed in from the living room. Don't you ever lay a hand on my wife again. He reached down to help me up, his face contorted in fury. For once, there were no hallowed pleas to his son, only unbridled rage. Kyle responded by spitting a huge gob of phlegm that landed squarely on Alan's cheek. The twisted smile on his face was one of pure malice. Get out, Alan growled in a low, gravelly voice I'd never heard before. Get out of my house before I bash your skull in and happily let the law deal with me after. Kyle cackled, seeming almost delighted at having provoked this normally mild-mannered man to the brink of violence. Oh, I'll get out, old man. Just try and make me leave empty-handed after supporting my worthless life for... Before he could finish, Alan's fist connected squarely with Kyle's nose in an explosion of blood and cartilage. Kyle crumpled to the floor with a high-pitched howl of agony. That's for Marlene, you piece of garbage! Alan spat down at his son, flexing his knuckles. The bravado disappeared from Kyle's demeanor as he cowered on the floor, cradling his gushing nose. You'll pay for this, he blubbered through a torrent of blood and tears. I'll make you miserable! Summoning whatever was left of my nerve, I forced myself to my feet and leveled an accusatory finger at Diane, who continued to sit casually watching the violence unfold. Get this trash out of my house, I hissed. Both of you, before we call the police and public services to forcibly remove you. For once the skanky woman's face betrayed a flicker of alarm, comprehending the very real prospect of legal consequences beyond this domestic dispute. In a flurry of motion, she gathered her and Kyle's belongings into ratty duffel bags as Alan and I watched stoically. With one last venomous look over his shoulder, Kyle allowed himself to be pulled out the front door, slouching away into the night, still cradling his battered face. Only when the rumble of their beat-up Honda had faded did we collapse into each other's arms, physically and emotionally spent from the turmoil. I'm so sorry, Marlene, Alan rasped softly into my hair. You didn't deserve any of this. Gently pulling back, I cupped his face in my hands and forced his gaze to meet mine. No more apologies, I stated firmly. That monster is out of our lives for good, and he's not taking anything else from us. Deep down, however, I knew it was too dangerous to rest on that conviction. The menacing fury in Kyle's eyes as he was ejected betrayed something far more unsettling than the tantrum of a spoiled brat. My stepson was unraveling into a vicious, vindictive menace willing to go to extremes in pursuit of revenge, and whatever dark dealings he'd been involved in, his pride, and greed would never allow him to walk away without extracting a price. Alan and I had only begun to pay, but even we couldn't fathom how steep the cost would become. In the days after Kyle's explosive eviction, an eerie calm descended over our home. Alan and I walked on eggshells, constantly bracing for some form of retaliation that never came. "He has to be plotting something," I muttered to Alan one evening as we picked at our dinner in tense silence. "Kyle's not the type to just slink away." Alan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You're probably right. I have no idea what he's capable of at this point." We both jumped as my phone began ringing, the shrill tone shattering the quiet. I felt my pulse quicken as I saw the caller ID. It was my brother Eric. "Hello?" "Marlene, it's me." His familiar voice crackled over the line. I think we need to talk, in person." There was an uncharacteristic solemnity to his tone that instantly put me on edge. Eric wasn't one to mince words or ask to meet up unless something serious was going on. "What's this about?" I asked, unable to mask the tremor of worry in my voice. A pause. "It's about your stepson, Kyle. I've been looking into a few things. We should discuss it face to face." My eyes flicked over to meet Alan's concerned gaze. This couldn't be good. "Okay, come over tonight after you get off work," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I spent the next few hours in a state of nervous agitation, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios about what Eric might have uncovered. Was Kyle pushing drugs, involved in organized crime of some kind? The possibilities were chilling. When Eric finally arrived that evening, his face was taut and grim. He made a beeline for the couch and dropped his voice to a hushed murmur, glancing furtively around as if he feared we were being watched. "I've been piecing some things together through my contacts and databases at the precinct," he began in a low growl. "That kid of yours, Alan, he's mixed up in some seriously dangerous stuff." Eric ran a hand over his thinning hair. "Stolen identities, credit fraud, you name it. He's got an entire black market operation going, using those scumbag friends of his to siphon money and rip people off blind." I felt the blood drain from my face as realization dawned. The shadowy figures coming and going at all hours, the scrapped plans for Alan's study to become their lair, it all made sense now. "That's why he was so desperate to keep you from kicking him out," Eric continued grimly. "He needed to operate out of your home undetected. Guys like that, they'll do anything to keep their schemes going." Alan's face was ashen. Oh God, when I think of all the times he brought strange people around, started getting belligerent out of nowhere, he was protecting his crooked schemes all along. My brother leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as his eyes bored into ours with steely intensity. "Which is why the two of you are in very real danger. Kyle clearly has no limits to what he'll do, and guys involved in this level of fraud tend to have extremely dangerous connections." The unspoken suggestion hung in the heavy silence that getting on the wrong side of Kyle's operations could mean deadly consequences. "We need to handle this extremely carefully," Eric said, his expression grave. "One misstep and you could find yourself swept up into a world you don't want any part of." My heart pounded in my ears as the gravity of the situation became clear. That vicious, greedy snake of a stepson had turned our home into a den of criminality. And now he wouldn't stop until he'd exacted vengeance upon us for daring to defy him. I felt Alan's hand finding mine, gripping tightly as we digested this nightmare in silence. Our very lives could be at stake at the hands of his own unhinged son. With a resolute nod to my brother, I knew there was only one path forward, no matter how dangerous. We had to stop Kyle's malevolence, once and for all, and we would have to match his ruthlessness every step of the way to survive. Over the next few days, Eric worked feverishly behind the scenes to gather intelligence on Kyle's operation. Calls were made, surveillance footage poured over, shady contacts leveraged for any crumbs of information. Finally, he presented us with the bombshell. Kyle's crew was about to pull off a massive identity theft and fraud scheme, their biggest score yet, and he had the date, time, and location. "This is our chance to nail that piece of garbage once and for all," Eric growled, slapping a thick manila folder on our kitchen table. "I'll organize a sting with my unit to catch him red-handed." Alan and I exchanged anxious glances. Taking down Kyle's criminal empire was the obvious necessity, but the prospect of being intimately involved in such a high-stakes police operation filled us with trepidation. "What do you need us to do?" Alan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eric fixed us with an intense stare. "We're going to use Kyle's greed against him. I'll have one of my undercovers reach out saying they have some high-value financial data to sell." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "And the two of you are going to be the brokers who set up the meeting, the ones who can get him to show up in person so we can grab his slimy ass." A tense silence stretched between us as Alan and I processed what he was asking. Not only would we be dangling criminal bait in front of that viper, we'd be serving ourselves up as targets to draw his fangs. But what other choice was there? We were already marked by his venom. Leaving him to run rampant would only ensure he circled back around to strike again when we least expected it. "Whatever it takes," I said firmly, squaring my shoulders as I met my brother's gaze. "If being part of the sting is what's needed to finally rid our lives of that cancer once and for all, I'll do it." Alan gave a grim nod of agreement, lacing his fingers tightly through mine. 2 nights later, we found ourselves seated at a seedy bar near the industrial district, my stomach tying itself in knots as we awaited our undercover's call signaling that the trap was set. The burner phone finally rang, and I felt my heart lurch into my throat. "It's go time," Alan muttered, eyes flicking around the dingy establishment as I answered the call with trembling hands. "Yeah, I got a hot new bank data dump to move," the gruff voice at the other end stated matter-of-factly. "You still looking to buy?" "Of course," I replied, struggling to keep my tone even and businesslike despite my inner turmoil. "My partner and I can meet with the merchandise in hand tonight, ready to make a deal if it passes muster." "Perfect. Warehouse District, 10 p.m. Listen for my message on the burn phone with the exact location in 30 minutes. The call clicked off abruptly, leaving Alan and I to await further instructions with bated breath. True to their word, a new text arrived giving us a specific address, a derelict factory on the fringes of the warehouse district. Isolated, cavernous, the ideal setting for criminal dealings to unfold undetected, or so they would believe. As we pulled up outside the rusting gates, my brother's message crackled urgently through the phone's tinny speaker. "Got you covered from all angles. Just play it cool and stay frosty. Units are in position, eyes on your target coming in from the east side." My chest tightened as the unmistakable growl of Kyle's beat-up Honda echoed off the buildings, pulling in through the far gates with its high beams blazing. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the door slammed open, his hulking form emerging into the sickly glow of the street lamps. "Well, well," he sneered as he swaggered forward, flanked by 2 of his slimy henchmen. "If it isn't Dad and the little wifey." Despite the terror coursing through me, a surge of adrenaline-fueled determination washed over me in that moment. This soulless predator had tormented our family for the last time. With a subtle nod, I signaled that the game was truly afoot. Let the vipers ensnare themselves for one final act of retribution. Kyle swaggered forward, that same twisted smirk frozen on his face, the same one that had mocked me so many times during his reign of terror under our roof. "So what's this big score you mugs are trying to peddle?" he sneered, looking us up and down with contempt. "It better be good, or else this little reunion is gonna get ugly." I felt Alan tense beside me, but kept my own expression steely. "We'll let you inspect the merchandise first, if the price is right." Producing a weathered USB drive, I placed it squarely in Kyle's outstretched palm with a subtle nod to Eric's team lying in wait. The Viper's eyes lit up with greedy intrigue, his focus fully fixated on the promise of an illicit payday. With a grunt, he handed it off to one of his henchmen, who immediately got to work on a laptop, no doubt scrutinizing the data for any whiff of fraud potential. While they were distracted, my gaze landed on the other crony loitering nearby, idly scrolling through his phone, until I noticed the unmistakable glint of a knife peeking out from his waistband. My heart stuttered with a new surge of panic. These weren't just amateur crooks. They were strapped and ready for any potential violence. One wrong move, and this entire sting could devolve into a deadly crossfire with me and Alan caught squarely in the middle. I reached out and gave Alan's hand a subtle squeeze, hoping my brother's unit was as dialed in as they promised to be. Looks legit, the henchman finally grunted after several tense moments, slapping the laptop closed. Money, as long as your crazy-ass family ain't trying to set us up. A sly smile crept across Kyle's lips as he leveled his gaze at us. Now why would we want to do that? After all the fond memories? His fingers closed tightly around the USB drive, the smirk morphing into a full sneer. Maybe we'll take this little payoff and a little extra fee from dear old Dad to make up for all the grief your bitch put me through. My jaw clenched, fury blazing inside me. Of course, he couldn't let this go without one final sadistic jab. Too much to ask for a simple ending where the snake gets what's coming to him. You must be stupider than you look, I spat back, fists clenching at my sides. We're not going to just hand you money, you parasite. In a flash, both henchmen produced their weapons, leveling them squarely at us. I gasped, instinctively grabbing Alan and pushing him behind me as they fanned out in a menacing semicircle. Maybe you didn't get the memo, the knife-wielding thug snarled. We ain't asking for money. We're taking it. Drop 'em. You're surrounded. The barked command seemed to reverberate from all directions as the night exploded in a blinding haze of flashbang grenades. I blinked and coughed, struggling to see through the smoke and spot the source of the chaos. Suddenly, what seemed like dozens of black-clad figures materialized through the haze, weapons trained in a tight semicircle around Kyle and his stunned goons. This is the police! Eric's commanding voice boomed over a bullhorn. Get on the ground with your hands up! There was a tense beat of stunned silence until the knife wielder made the mistake of whipping his blade in a wild, yet unpredictable arc, met instantly with a searing volley of beanbag rounds from the officers slamming into his chest and abdomen. As he collapsed, wheezing, there was one final snap of resistance as Kyle made a panicked break for his car. But my brother was prepared, rushing out of the smoke to put him in a wrenching arm lock that sent him crashing to the pavement. Kyle Turner, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and a whole host of other fun charges. Eric growled through gritted teeth as the cuffs clicked into place. Anything you say or do will only make your life that much harder, scumbag. The still defiant scowl instantly drained from Kyle's face, replaced with naked terror as he finally grasped that the tables had turned and the ultimate consequences were closing in. As the officers hauled him roughly to his feet, his wild eyes met mine briefly, and I was flooded with the most intoxicating sensation of vindictive satisfaction. This sadistic tormentor who'd inflicted so much misery was finally, irreversibly, getting the brutal payback he deserved at the hands of righteous karma, and I was going to revel in every second of his downfall. The weeks following Kyle's dramatic arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, lurid media frenzies, and the gradual unraveling of the tangled web he'd woven. It seemed every time we thought we'd grasped the full extent of his criminal enterprises, more sordid layers would emerge. I watched it all unfold from the gallery with a strange sense of detached amusement. The smarmy swagger, the sadistic manipulation, the sheer delusion of entitlement, all of it had finally caught up to ensnare my stepson in its unforgiving karmic trap. His wretched girlfriend Diane was wrapped up in the dragnet as well, already flipped by the prosecution and ratting out every last depraved detail in a desperate bid for leniency. At this point, she was nothing more than a bug on the windshield to me, easily swatted away and forgotten amid the larger impact headed Kyle's way. Eric was relentless, leaving no insidious crevice of their activities unturned or unpunished. Fraud, money laundering, drug trafficking. Kyle's reckoning was swift and absolute. With the mountain of evidence stacked against him, it wasn't a question of if he'd be convicted, but just how many years he'd be burying himself alive behind bars. The jury has reached a verdict. Those 4 simple words from the judge's mouth sent an electric surge of anticipation through the courtroom gallery. Kyle stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable, as his team of lawyers frantically conferred one last time. The foreperson rose and cleared his throat solemnly. On the charges of mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, and drug conspiracy, we the jury find the defendant, Kyle Turner, guilty on all counts. A muted shockwave seemed to ripple through the room, punctuated only by Kyle's lawyer slumping back in her chair, utterly deflated. His lips contorted into a silent snarl. though whether out of anger or resignation, I couldn't tell. As the remainder of the lengthy verdict was read aloud, something inside me began to uncurl and unfurl. A profound lightness I hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. The tightness that had gripped my heart for so long steadily dissipated with every guilty issued upon my tormentor. We shuffled out through the courthouse steps into a swarm of cameras and microphones from the awaiting press, my brother taking the lead to address the media frenzy. This case sends a clear and resounding message to those who seek to corrupt and victimize our communities, he boomed in that signature authoritative rasp. We will pursue them to the fullest extent of the law and bring the full hammer of justice upon their heads. As flashbulbs exploded all around us, I sought out Alan's eyes amidst the chaos. He gave me the faintest of smiles and a subtle nod. The ghost of the same weary, downtrodden man who'd been paralyzed by his son's long trail of transgressions had finally been exorcised. He too seemed to feel the lightening of our collective burden. That night, after the cameras and crowds had dispersed, we sat in peaceful silence on the back patio. Cicadas droned their evening chorus under a canopy of stars twinkling brilliantly in the warm summer darkness. So much had changed, yet felt startlingly unchanged at the same time. The house was precisely as we'd left it that fateful morning, and yet the oppressive storm cloud that had followed us home from the courthouse finally felt completely lifted. You know, I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around how far that sick bastard was willing to go, Alan said at last, cradling his beer bottle pensively. Just to what? Punish us for not enabling him anymore? I gave a slow shake of my head. At the end of the day, it was never really about us, just his own greed and depravity swallowing him whole. I thought back to that cold, chilling glare Kyle had leveled at me in the courtroom while receiving his sentence, not one of rage or hatred, but a fathomless emptiness. For all his blustering malice, he was now just an empty husk being justly carted away. He'll spend every day of the prime of his life rotting behind bars, I stated with grim finality, and all he'll have is that void where his soul should have been to keep him company. Alan nodded, the ghost of a smirk toying at the corner of his lips as the cocoon of our nightmare finally shed away completely. So I guess that means we get to focus on filling our lives with better things now. You know, like a little peace and happiness for once. The enormity of that simple idea hung in the air, more revitalizing than the gentle breeze kicking up around us. Pulling me close, Alan pressed his lips to the top of my head, a kiss filled with a renewed sense of purpose and the untold promise of whatever lay ahead. For the first time in what felt like eternities, the horizon was wide open and full of possibilities. I'd say we've earned every last drop of it, babe, he murmured warmly against my hair, and I can't wait to start living it.